What's going on, everyone? So it's time for the biggest video that I do on this channel, and that is returning to rate the set 2 decks in the meta on a tier list. Now, with this video, I'm going to go through every single leader in the game and at least assign one deck list or deck archetype for each of these leaders. For example, I have Chirrut Red here because that's really the only way Chirrut's been played. And although it's not necessarily an extremely meta list, it's still going to be ranked on the tier list because every leader has at least one deck to their name. Some leaders, like for example Sabine, are going to have multiple because there are multiple versions of the deck that have shown up either in tournaments or just in popular play. And this is something that we have to keep track of throughout the meta in the last months, or at least in this case, I keep track of it for you, and we're going to be ranking them all on the list today. Now, since the last time I did this, even in just set 2, a lot of things have changed around the tier 1.5 or in between like the latter end of S tier and the top end of A tier. These are the slots that change most frequently. Usually the best decks don't change all that much, although we have a little bit of a shakeup here, which I'll talk about when I get to it. But things like Boba Yellow, for example, and Sabine Green are still the best decks in the format, like top 3, top 4, which aren't really going to change. And again, we'll talk about that when we get to all of them. But there are a lot of shakeups and a lot of new decks have been added. For example, Cad Bane Blue. We have Hondo Blue, something that was not there before. We have the Bossk Blue, which again, wasn't really there before either. All that said, we're going to be diving into each of these, talking about them individually, sort of in an alphabetical order. Dr. Aphra is going to be under A, but any deck or any leader here that's kind of their actual name, you'll be able to find in the timestamps below. Before we get started, guys, 2 quick announcements. Big thank you to my patrons over on Patreon. I really wouldn't be here for, that long if the community wasn't super amazing, and the patrons are a big part of that. So I just wanted to give a big thank you to all of you. And I have a TCG player link in the description down below. Be sure to use it if you want to pick up any of the cards for Star Wars Unlimited. And let's talk about the tiers before we actually dive into rating each leader. So for each of the tiers, we're going to start off with what is actually being processed, what is being evaluated when I look at each deck and place them into a tier. And I will say, as we go through the video, I'm sure leaders will go up and down, like based on how they relate to each other, because this is a tier list in which we're rating them comparatively, right? Which means there's only going to be 7 to 8 lists in the S tier because there's only a few S tier decks. We can't have 30 S tier decks or whatever, maybe even less than 7 to 8. But in S tier, we have the best of the best. These are the decks that if you bring to a tournament, you have a really good shot of winning. And generally speaking, if you are a hardcore tournament grinder or you really are looking to win, these are the choices that you'll make. These have consistent high results or just extremely powerful lists overall, and tend to be the most popular decks. These are the decks that you also have to think about when you are building your own decks. A tier are going to be the decks that are in the kind of tier 1.5 / tier 2 range, where these are decks that can have an upset and can perform well and still give you a good chance at winning a tournament. And if you're intimately familiar with some of these lists, you can even have a better shot than if you're just picking up one of the net decks in S tier, but usually also are quite good. B tier decks, these are the decks that what I would consider F&M or the Friday Night Star Wars decks. These are the decks that can win you games in your local store if you're a proficient player and still have some cohesive strategies and do well, but they are missing some sort of game plan against the meta decks, either struggling against the tempo versions or maybe just don't have a real good game plan against the most popular decks. C tier decks, these are decks that have an interesting concept and maybe can do something really cool or bring out some wins occasionally, but generally speaking, aren't providing something that some other leader can't do better. And that's a huge portion because there are a lot of leaders in this game that have a color combination that just is worse than maybe another leader. And these are where the C tier decks really fall under. And then D tier decks, these are leaders / decks that just don't really have a place right now. Either they don't shape up against the meta, or their leader just doesn't do anything really useful right now against the meta or against what you expect to face, or maybe they just don't have any sort of cohesive game plan and you don't even really have a reason to build a deck around them. I'm looking at you, Hera. It really doesn't have a reason to be built around right now. So that's going to be the D tier list. Generally speaking, C and D tier list, these are the decks that I generally don't advise people to bring to their, local game store, even because they tend to be not as fun. Anything from B tier or up are kind of what I consider to be more fun decks. And generally speaking, A tier is that sweet spot of these are really fun. They have a cool concept. They're still very powerful, but you're not playing Boba Yellow. You're not playing Sabine Green. And so just keep that in mind as we go through the list. Starting us off, Dr. Aphra. This is a list that, or leader, I should say, that doesn't really have that many options. I've had a couple of people, and well, you know who you are, in my Patreon Discord that has shown me a few spicy Aphra lists that I actually got to play against, which was a lot of fun. But to me, the only list that has even really seen any popular play has really been Aphra Blue. This is the one that people talk about and the one that even has some semblance of competitive options. This, to me, I've played a lot of it, and I've tested a lot of control decks because that is the type of deck that I generally like to play the most. That and tempo decks. So Aphra here, she generally ends up somewhere around like the low end of B tier or the high end of C tier. And I am bumping her up a little bit because I have been playing a lot of control lately. And control, at least in the meta right now, works really well against Boba Yellow. So that is one deck archetype that really is beneficial for control. And so having Dr. Aphra fight against Boba Blue or Boba Yellow actually gives you a reasonably decent shot to actually win the game. But to be honest, there's no real reason to run Aphra. If you're going to be playing this more hard control, soft control variant, the advantage that Aphra gives you is this idea of self-cycling your restocks and your bounty hunters crew to kind of give you a little bit of a toolbox and give you options throughout the game. But the problem is there's no benefit to stocking your discard pile realistically in the game right now, except for that. And that's a really minor advantage because restock puts it on the bottom. And even if you're searching your feelings, which is the ability to search your deck for a card, you don't really increase your chances of drawing exactly what you want all that much. So the only idea that really works with it is like Fennec, because that's going to give you a lot of additional, things in your discard pile to actually give an attack with Fennec to kill something, which has been pretty nice. Outside of that, if you're going to play Cunning, Villainy, and Vigilance, and you're going to try to play a soft control deck, there are many other options that I would go with, including the next one we're going to even talk about. And that next one is Boba. So Boba Fett, this is one of the few, if not the only, is it the only deck, the only leader that I have with all four aspects? And there's a reason for that. Literally all four of these have been pretty popular. Now, only 3 of them have really seen some competitive results, and that is Boba Blue, Boba Green, and Boba Yellow. But they are all pretty strong, and none of them drop below B tier. They're all pretty good. And that is mainly because Boba Fett's leader is just so powerful. And we're going to start off with Boba Yellow, dropping him immediately to the S tier. This is a list that is consistently showing some of the highest win rates in the entire game in competitive tournaments, with a massive portion of the competitive space being dominated by Boba Yellow. So it's not even just that he has a high win rate and a select few are playing him, it's that everyone's playing him and he's performing well even so. So definitely a huge advantage if you're bringing him to a tournament. He's consistently grabbed 1 to 2 top 8 spots of every single tournament, sometimes grabbing 3 or 4, which has been pretty massive. The other one that I would drop into the A tier or close to the S tier is Boba Green. Boba Green, this is something that I've dropped in the A tier even since last time. There are 2 variants. There's the ECL variant, which is a little bit more reliant on units that give you some sort of value in the early game and units that may not have an immediate attack trigger. And there's the Boba non-ECL variant, which really relies on its 7 resource plays and a lot of ways to get there. So Maul, Darth Vader naturally have ambush. There's 7 resources. And, you don't necessarily really need to amplify the deck with Energy Conversion Lab, and you can run a 30 HP base to kind of just help you survive against Sabine Greens, against Boba Yellows, and then you just use your ambushers to stabilize the board. Underworld units with Maul helps a lot, and Boba Fett is that, which can be really helpful. The other lists that we have, Boba Blue and Boba Red, these are definitely, in my opinion, B tier decks. I think Boba Blue is a little bit more powerful than Boba Red. Boba Blue is just on this more soft control side of things, but definitely has a better curve out than a lot of other decks. Boba Fett just coming down on 5 resources and the ability to leverage additional resources in general is just extremely powerful for controlling decks. And you can actually just beat down your opponent with just higher value units like Fett's Fire Spray, for example. Boba Red has some cool things going for it. We have Triple Dark Raid, which is kind of just a space variant of Boba. Now, you don't have to go all space, which I have done before, but some mix of most space units with Triple Dark Raid can be really powerful, and Boba Red can really do some massive work, especially since he's got such a high stat unit that deploys early enough to where your opponent can't immediately kill it when it comes down, despite having a massive board advantage in the ground. If you're trying to go, let's say, Sabine Yellow all space, Sabine Yellow also can deploy super early, so she can get in some damage. But if you're going to go, let's say, I don't know, some leader that's going to deploy at 6 resources or 5 resources and doesn't have the same stat line as Boba Fett, like a 4-6 or whatever, 3-6 or something like that, or you're getting a 6-cost unit or a 6-cost leader, usually it's too late to the point where your opponent's dominated the ground so much that you actually can't catch up, because space units are inherently smaller statted because they're a little bit harder to deal with. Overall, though, Boba Fett, no decks below the B tier, and all 4 aspects included, just goes to show you how powerful Boba Fett is as a leader. And I know this is just kind of my tier list, my opinion as we're going through, but I think most people would agree Boba Fett is by far the strongest leader in himself inside the game. He just gives so many different advantages and so many different options to you when you're building a deck around him. Next up is Bo-Katan, and we really have 2 lists that we've seen not necessarily in competitive play all that much, but we have seen it in popular play, and that is Bo-Katan Blue and Bo-Katan Red. Now I'm going to start with Bo-Katan Red because this is the list that has actually made a top 8, and I've played a good amount of this list. I actually just randomly stumbled upon the deck, and I started playing it with my patrons with the Patreon games, and I had a lot of fun, but it is really not nearly as strong as a lot of other double red variants. You're kind of leveraging the Mandalorian synergies a little bit, but she comes down so late, and the 1 damage ping just doesn't really matter all that much. And I'd much rather play either an early to deploy leader or something that's going to give me a bit more of an advantage. However, she can do some work, and I would argue that she's just slightly better than Boba Red, whereas Bo-Katan Blue is just a little bit weaker than Boba Red. These are very comparable lists. And the nice thing about double red Bo-Katan is that you get access to some really powerful double red cards. But the nice thing about Bo-Katan Blue is that you get access to some really powerful Mandalorians that are in Vigilance, right? So depending on what you're looking for, the trade-off can be worth it. And Bo-Katan really heavily incentivizes you to play a more aggressive deck, which is why Vigilance can be a little bit awkward sometimes, because you don't really want to be takedowning or Fell the Dragoning or Rivals Falling or doing the normal things that Vigilance is amazing at, because you want to be attacking to get the trigger off of her, both on attack trigger and her action. Overall, Bo-Katan's been pretty meh. Not necessarily like bad, right? She's B tier, but she's on the lower side of B tier. But definitely something that I was hoping to be a little bit more strong. And I think really what she's lacking is the Mandalorian support, because in order to even get her action at all, you not only do you need to attack, but you need to have attacked with a Mandalorian. If you were just able to attack with any unit and get a damage off, this might actually end up in the high end of B tier or low end of A tier, just having that action alone. But unfortunately for us, B tier for Bo-Katan. Next up, we got a very hot off the presses deck or leader that I would like to talk about here. In this last weekend, we had Bossk take down a tournament with Bossk Blue. Now, I am not someone that jumps immediately to, yeah, this is just the absolute best deck in the format. I've seen a lot of Bossk Blue. I have not been extremely impressed. It's not bad by any means. It is good. It is a good control list, and it's one of the best hard control lists that I've seen and I have played with in set 2. But just because it's taken down a single tournament doesn't necessarily mean it is the best deck in the whole format and that hard controls are dominating again. However, in order to kind of fairly kind of place it in terms of what it's done and how popular it is and what my experience is, without just completely adhering to one top 8 finish winning and just the popular kind of experience, I think this is pretty fairly in the A tier, in the middling parts of A tier. Bossk Blue does have some really nice tools. One of the big things about Bossk is that he comes down early alongside like Boba Fett, right? As a 4/6, that's a pretty impressive stat line to come down early, which helps you control the board to get to the later stages of the game. And you also have this 1 damage ability that you can kind of throw down early on in the game because you can put bounties on things, which is really, really advantageous. Not only that, but you also have some really powerful kind of healing maneuvers with the client, with top target and things like that. And just overall some massive, massive value. Do I think hard control is amazing? No, I think it's actually going up against a pretty tough meta right now in terms of being able to do some major work. It's good against like Boba Yellow, as I mentioned earlier. That's one of the reasons why hard control can perform quite nicely, because if you are in a meta with a ton of Boba Yellows, then hard control will get better. But unfortunately, there is still the fact that if you get down an early Sabine and an early Darksaber and you're able to really leverage that, you can really mess up some hard control lists. Granted, you do have force chokes and things like that to answer it, but Sabine can still outrun it very frequently. You have like double yellow Han, which we'll talk about later, that can just completely dominate control lists by stealing resources and completely put them on the back foot. So it is a little bit tough, and we do have to acknowledge that, as that was kind of the meta and the reason why control struggled a little bit. And you also have things like TIE Phantom, Lurking TIE Phantom, which make it struggle also. Bossk Green, on the other hand, I think is also pretty good. I think Bossk is actually just an underrated leader, and I said this a long time ago when we talked about our leader tier list. This is a leader that is, if there's a lot of units in the game, and if there's a lot of ways to claim these bounties, this leader is quite good. If there's not, and people are playing control lists, then Bossk is going to drop immensely down to like B or C tier even. But because Boba Yellow, Sabine Green, these types of decks are very prevalent in the meta, dealing with units is something that you must be doing, and Bossk Green is really good at that and gives you a huge advantage where you're able to kind of play this mid-range ramp deck where you have Darth Vaders, Mauls, Crate Dragons, things like that to ramp into reinforcement walkers, and you're also just being able to claim those bounties very easily and ramp you while you're doing so. One of the craziest games, and I talk about this a lot on my channel, but I had a game where I was playing against a Bossk Green and they ramped up to 9 resources on turn 4 because of ramping into Bossk. Or it was turn 3 actually. They ramped into Bossk and then they flipped Bossk, ramped, and then double ramped with a bounty claim. And it was like, what the heck is happening here? It just was insane. I can't even remember how the game actually went, but I remember them having like 8 or 9 resources on that Bossk flip turn. And I was like, what? That is absolutely absurd. So it can do some crazy things, but I do think Bossk Blue is a decent chunk better just because there's a lot of variations of this kind of like villainy ramp style of deck, and I don't think Bossk is necessarily the best at it. Next up, we got Cad Bane to talk about, and we've got a couple different variations. This one also has 3 different variations that we've seen quite a lot actually. And we're going to start off with the most popular version, which is the Cad Bane Red list. And we've actually seen this take 2 top 8 spots overall across the tournaments that I've seen so far, which has been pretty impressive. And overall, I've been pretty impressed with Cad Bane. This is another leader that I put a little bit higher on my list. And I think Cad Bane actually deserves a A-tier spot here based on what I've seen and how the experience goes playing against Cad Bane. Now, Cad Bane Red can go a few different directions. The one that I have seen most frequently to kind of attribute to Cad Bane Red is a little bit more of just like this tempo slash aggressive curve out deck where you're leveraging the pings every turn, the 1 damage from Cad Bane, and you're just going to be able to end the game relatively quickly with Cad Bane. And because you're dealing 1 damage, you're getting rid of shields, you're just shrinking down your opponent's units so that they can trade with your earlier game units, and it actually performs pretty well. Cad Bane Green, I think, is a little bit weaker than Cad Bane Red, but still a solid deck, as it's something that can really get you a lot of value while you're ramping and doing the mid-range thing. Because of the extra damage that you're getting, you can have things like Super Laser Technician actually trade in with units, which can be pretty strong. And you do have a pretty powerful leader on the flip. Even though you get 6 resources as a 2/8, you do get that raid 2, so you can start trading off with things, and it has high toughness, which can be pretty valuable. And just keeping them on the board and deal 2 damage to things can actually do some major work. Cad Bane Blue, on the other hand, not as big of a fan. I think it's a little bit more on the lower end of B tier, maybe like the middling of B tier. It's very similar to Boba Fett Blue, and they're the same aspects, exact same aspects: cunning, villainy, vigilance. But Boba Fett tends to be able to leverage his flip and his ability to leverage additional resources more than you can leverage that single point of damage from Cad Bane Blue. There are some situations where Cad Bane Blue can do some major work, but if you're playing things like Power of the Dark Side, Takedown, if you're playing things like that, the one damage, well, one, it won't even go off with those events, but also you're defeating them anyway, so there's not really a point to having that extra damage ping. Regardless, Cad Bane, pretty an impressive leader from set 2. A tier list with some B tier lists, and there's a lot of aspects to be talked about. Next up, we're going to talk about is Cassian Andor. Now, Cassian, I've played a decent chunk with Cassian, especially lately. I tried to go with all space. I played a little bit more of an aggressive red-green heroism version of Cassian. We even ran up against it a couple of times. This deck just really doesn't seem like it has anything going for it with competing against things like Sabine, competing against things like, the other red-green heroism like Leia's, or even the red-yellow heroism decks like Sabine Yellow. This action to draw additional cards isn't something that's super relevant usually in the aggro decks, because you're usually not even able to dump your hand, and you're looking for just extra damage when you can get it, and Sabine just does so much better of a job. This is something that I would put into C tier. It's one of those leaders where, yes, it can still function, but unfortunately, it just doesn't have anything really going for it, and it's not a deck that I would be like, oh yes, I would like to play an aggressive heroism deck. Cassian's gonna give me those extra cards. Those extra cards are gonna translate to extra wins. Usually doesn't work like that. Not to mention having a 6 flipped 4/6 leader that doesn't really do anything is not that impressive either. So it's definitely going to be a C tier list for me. Next up, we got another pretty mediocre list, I'd say, and that is Chewie. Now, I've played Chewie Yellow, but the list I decided to put on today's video, and the only list, because Chewie is pretty weak, is Chewie Green. Now, Chewbacca Yellow is a really fun list because it's like a Wookiee tribal list that I've tried to play for fun. But I do think ramping into Chewbacca is one of the things that you can use to exploit one of Chewbacca's strengths. Here's the thing with Chewbacca. For one, his frontside action really doesn't give you all that much value because you want to be playing Sentinel units anyways. So giving Sentinel to some certain cards doesn't really do all that much usually. And if you're looking to play like a red-green or a green-blue heroism deck, usually Luke ends up being just a little bit stronger in terms of his action and his flip. But having a 7 to flip leader with Sentinel as a 2/9 with grit as well can be really tough to deal with. However, with the advent of Rivals Fall, this just completely wrecks Chewbacca, especially if you're trying to upgrade him, which is something that a lot of people tried to do. In set 1, there was some viability to playing a couple of other units, ramping into Chewbacca, getting a Chewie down, putting Electro Staff on him, and suddenly he's this unkillable beast that just annihilates your entire team. That doesn't happen anymore with Rivals Fall. And also things like Takedown, Power of the Dark Side, if you get him let down to enough HP. Yes, he still has some strengths, but for me, gonna be a C tier list. I mean, just the only strength I really see, I guess I could say, is him flipping as a 7 resource 2/9 with Sentinel and Grit. But that's just usually not good enough, and it's usually too late, especially with the new Darksaber Sabine. You just get absolutely destroyed before that even comes into play. Next up, we got Chirrut, one of the kind of tier 1.5, tier 2 lists from set 1 that really didn't get any better from set 2. There were a few cards that you could add to it: Fell of the Dragon, Rivals Fall, kind of the soft control cards. You could be adding Pillages similar to Rey Red. But I think if you were to compare this like Force Synergy blue-red deck that we had from set 1 to set 2, Rey Red has really taken up that mantle that Chirrut used to have, and it's really bumped Chirrut down. The one advantage that Chirrut has with the kind of strategy that you're trying to go with is that he's pretty much a guaranteed unit in terms of not being able to be killed unless your opponent has like a hard removal event like Takedown or like Rivals Fall, because he will be surviving through any sort of damage-based interaction, whereas Rey might not be able to with like a Podammer on the battlefield, or just comes down a little bit too late. So that can be kind of useful. But overall, the advantage that you get from Rey is so much superior to Chirrut, despite having the Force Throw synergy and the Force synergy overall. Chirrut's frontside action basically does absolutely nothing. And then his flip side, just him being kind of a 3/5, really doesn't do much either. You don't have a good way to kind of recover back into the game like you do with Rey with Restore 3. So to me, I might have said this was like a low B tier list in my previous video. I'm actually going to drop it down to the C tier. the more I've seen of like Rey and other options that we have, Chirrut just dropped further and further and further behind. And to me, just a C tier list at this point. Into our next list, we've got Fennec Shan. Now, I know this one's going to be a hotly contested one because I had a couple people comment on Fennec Shan, and I apologize for completely disagreeing with you, but Fennec Shan is immediately going to be a D tier for me. I played a lot of Fennec, okay? I have tried to make her work. I think she's kind of a sweet idea with the ambush. I've always liked things that can get immediate value on the board, and she can enable that for a lot of different units. There's just so many different problems with Fennec, and I've talked about this a lot, but the fact that you cannot ambush things that cost a ton is a huge downside. One of the things with like timely intervention, which you want to use this entirely separate card in order to ambush something out, is because you can use it with things that are expensive, like Reinforcement Walker, Crate Dragon, or any other manner of expensive units that cost more than 4, right? Not to mention, one of the advantages of having early ambush units is that you can play them early, and Fennec doesn't even enable that. And then add on top of all that, having a 4/4 flipped leader is just so terrible in terms of stat line compared to so many other options that you have. If you think about that compared to like Sabine, it actually just trades with Sabine after 2 attacks. If you think about it against Boba, it just completely dies to Boba Fett and it flips on the same turn, right? There's just so many different things that are wrong with Fennec. And again, similar to Cassian, like if I'm going to play red, yellow, or if I'm going to play, even yellow, green with Fennec or something else, I would rather play Cassian over Fennec, like any day of the week. I'd rather play Sabine yellow or any other option that you might want to have with Fennec any day of the week over playing Fennec. Unfortunately, I apologize for you Fennec lovers. Next up, though, we've got Finn, which is also kind of a mediocre one. I know we have some really good performance with Finn Green on the channel. I think I played like 9 games for that video and I won like 8 of 9 of them. And that's just, again, that's just kind of the sample size that I grabbed from that specific day of recording. But I played a lot of this deck in testing and it's not very good, okay? You could argue that it's a C tier, and I am willing to put it in a C tier, okay? Because I had a lot of fun with the list. But to be honest, this list just doesn't have anything realistically that you should be doing. Like, there are some fun synergies, right? Like, ooh, I get to defeat an experience token on my Rose Tico and then attack again and then, defeat that shield token for 2 more experience token, infinitely scale, right? It just doesn't happen like that, okay? If you're fighting Boba Yellow, you just bounce it and you're doomed. If you're fighting Sabine Green, you're dead already, okay? It just doesn't happen. Now, the one thing that I do think is a powerful synergy that's truly powerful is like the Maz Kanata. You can go like turn 1 Maz Kanata plus something, then defeat that experience token for a shield token, and then get like a shielded Maz Kanata that builds and builds and builds and builds, which is pretty fun. Overall, though, not a very impressive leader. This idea of like defeating an upgrade that you control in order to get a shield token just doesn't really work all that well, because there's not enough units that individually put an upgrade on their unit themselves. And what I mean by that is you're really looking for units like Maz Kanata and like Rose Tico that generate their own like these token upgrades. You don't want to be defeating real upgrades, or there's got to be some sort of advantage to doing so, and there's not. It's just a shield token. Usually that's like kind of on the same level as the thing that you defeated. So not actually that good, even though we had good results and it was fun. Really not that great. Gar Saxon. Okay, so this is, well, these are the lists that I've been having a lot of fun with lately, or I guess one in particular that I've been playing a lot lately, and the other 2 I've played a lot in the past. We have Gar Saxon blue, yellow, and green. I don't think Gar Saxon is particularly amazing, by the way. I just think these are the lists that people are attempting to play with Gar Saxon. And by the way, I'm sure Finn's going to drop into the D tier based on how much this list is going to fill out. But I'm going to start off with Gar Saxon yellow because I believe it's the best of the 3. And I'm only going to put it into B tier, okay? So I played a lot of Gar Saxon yellow. You guys saw it in my previous video. I got the kind of idea when I first started playing set 2. You're playing yellow units. There's a lot of just natural upgrades, but I didn't really commit to the list. I only played it a little bit here and there, but I only really committed to the list until one of my patrons mentioned Gar Saxon yellow, and they were excited to see kind of what I came up with. So I decided to play a lot more with it, and I was having a lot of fun. There's some really sweet synergies, playing 7th Fleet Defender and giving it a +1/+0, playing Dark Drivers getting a +1/+0, Crafty Smuggler +1/+0. Really, really strong stuff, but those are like the only ones that really get some major value. And you're still playing this like yellow-blue list, which doesn't really synergize all that well and doesn't really have a great way to finish out the game, which is something that I came up against quite frequently. If we get more cards like 7th Fleet Defender, for example, I would be much more excited about this. Next one up, though, we got Gar Saxon Blue. I know a lot of people do like this one. I am not a huge fan. I think it actually is just a little bit better than Dr. Aphra. And one of the only reasons for that is because you get a 4-cost Vigilance. So 4-cost Vigilance can be pretty nice. There are some cards that work okay with this, like the Client is another one. Also works in Gar Saxon Yellow. The Client's a nice control piece while also being kind of an annoying stat unit that trades or at least kills a unit here in the earlier turns. And we have things like Childson, which can be nice. But to be honest, there's not really a great reason to be playing double blue Gar Saxon compared to a lot of the other options you have. The double blue Ray, you've got like, which that's like a niche archetype that's kind of a little bit more popping up lately. You have like double blue Iden, which is probably the most popular. It really doesn't come up all that often that you want to be playing double blue Gar Saxon, and he's really not that strong. You also have Gar Saxon Yellow, which I think is a little bit better, but still in the C tier category. To be honest, this is a list that, again, just a lot of people have been playing. Like, a lot of people love Gar Saxon. And despite us having 3 variants on the list, it doesn't represent him being extremely strong. It's just that these are just lists that people are playing a lot of. Like, if I'm looking online, I'm seeing a lot of people playing. I don't really see Dr. Aphra at all. In the occasional game, I'll see a Dr. Aphra blue. I'll see a lot more Gar Saxon blues and a lot more Gar Saxon greens in my time. And that's just because people like the leader, but it's really not that powerful. There's not really a whole lot of units that get some guaranteed value when they come down. And Gar Saxon Yellow is the best I've seen in terms of it becoming, I guess, competitive. Moff Gideon. Okay, so we got to talk about Moff Gideon. This guy has been really unimpressive. And I know I put him really low on the list last time, and I might even go lower this time. So 5-cost leader, or a 5-flip leader, it really doesn't give you that much value. The idea behind him is that you can play these like lower cost units, maybe trade up a little bit, but you need to get some value from them. So Super Laser Technician is probably one of the best cards in the deck because you can usually trade with a turn 1 play with that Super Laser Technician with Moff Gideon, which is probably the best thing that this deck can do. But then you get a 3/6 on flip, which gives your other small leader unit something. To me, that payoff of just doing that is really not that powerful. And realistically, you'd much rather just do anything else with this color combination. Yeah, I've seen Moff Gideon double green. That just pales in comparison to other options, and even pales in comparison to the Moff Gideon red. It's not quite as bad as some of the options in C tier, which makes me think that maybe dropping down Finn into the D tier, but I'm gonna make a quick adjustment here because I do think Chewie's a little bit worse than Finn. But I'm gonna put Moff Gideon kind of in the same tier as like these Aphras and double blue Gar Saxon. He just doesn't do enough. This like overwhelm and giving some little bit of power to your units, it just doesn't do enough in the early game, especially since it's so limited on the cost associated with that unit to even be able to use this action. By the time you're past like turn 3, the times that you're going to be using this action are very few and far between. And unfortunately for Moff Gideon, that really hinders his ability to be excellent and doesn't give you much incentive to actually play him as a leader, especially when you have things like, any other green villainy leaders out there, such as Jabba the Hutt or Emperor Palpatine, or if you're going to go the more aggressive route, you have like Bossk, right? There's just so many different other options that you have, and it just doesn't really bode well for Moff Gideon. Next up, we got to talk about old Han, OG Han. This is definitely a controversial one, and I'm gonna be debating this throughout the entirety of the video, but I think Han is one of the decks that is actually quite strong. It has a very similar shell to Boba Yellow, at least Han Yellow that is, and Boba Green and Han Green. What they're trying to do is leverage these additional resources, or leverage kind of this like resource advantage. In Boba's case, you're getting resources back. In Han's case, you're exchanging long-term cards for immediate resource advantage, and that really bodes well against the meta. The double yellow Han has a really good matchup against some of the control decks that are becoming more and more popular as of late. The Han Green is a little bit more traditional and does have some really nice matchups. Both these decks are actually exceptional, and I wouldn't go below A tier on either one of them, but I'm going to actually go out on a limb here and actually put Han Yellow in the S tier. I think it's barely holding on to the S tier. I think there are a lot of different decks that can claim the mantle of S tier and be in like that tier 1.5 range in like that 7 to 8 list that I talked about. I think Han Yellow is one of them. It's one of the decks that really messes up control decks because of that tech DJ, while also having a lot of hand disruption and the ability to accelerate past your opponent really interacting with you. Not to mention just getting early 7 resource plays, having things like cunning and ways to pump up your damage early on is really exceptional. The Han green list, on the other hand, is also quite good, and I would put it just behind the Boba green list, because I think they're very similar styles of decks where they're trying to tempo you out, get some advantage, and then play this haymaker turn. In Boba's case, you get down Boba, you play multiple units in a turn, multiple events in a turn. In Han's case, you put a resource down, you flip Han, you put another resource down, you play a 7 resource play on that turn, and suddenly you are massively head on board. Both these are kind of doing that haymaker turn on their flip, and also getting an advantage earlier on in the game because they're extra resources or extra leveraging of exhausted resources in Boba's case. So definitely very powerful. And I know some people will disagree, but I do think Han Yellow's a little bit of a sleeper right now. Not necessarily people don't know about him, but that it's not really showing up that much. And that's mainly because people are just not actually playing him. If we saw a lot of people playing Han, I would imagine that he would rise up a little bit, but he actually had one of the highest, if not the highest, actually don't remember, win rates from set 1. It was one of the highest. It was a little bit surprising to me just because of how much he was coming out to play. And it was mainly Han green, but Han yellow is arguably even better come set 2 because of a few of the ways the meta has shaped up. So definitely advantage. Definitely a very strong deck that you can win a lot of games with in Han. Going from one of the better leaders in the game to probably one of the biggest stinkers of the game, and that is Hera. I'm not even going to waste any time. This is an immediate D tier list, guys. There are some Spectre rumors for set 3, which I'm hoping might give some incentive to play Hera. The problem with Hera right now is that we have quite a few cards to the point where getting some cards out of aspect isn't really that big of an advantage. And when you consider what the Spectre cards are, Ezra, Kanan, Karabast, Spark of Rebellion, Ghost, Zeb, Chopper, like none of these cards are exceptional. Sabine, like the unit, Ezra, and Kanan are by far the most played of the bunch. Spark Rebellion can be quite good. Karabast isn't really playable outside of Han Blue. And so let's say you're playing a red-green heroism deck, right? You get to play Sabine Wren unit, which is good enough, to be honest. Like, that's already good enough. Ezra isn't particularly like amazing, but it does come up in like Han Yellow, for example. Kanan's come up in more controlling styles of deck for sure because of the force tag, but you don't really need anything out of aspect. And yes, you can play all these in Hera Red. The problem is that's the entirety of your front side of your leader, right? Would you be trading extra resources and being able to play things above curve, or would you be playing trading like extra damage with Cad Bane on your units or on your opponent's units, or any matter of other leader abilities for that? Most likely not. And that's not even to mention that her flip side is also equally mediocre. 4-6 for 6 resources is already below rate. And then the fact that you can only give experience tokens to those unique units is really, really weak as well. It just doesn't really impress me at any point. The decks are so powerful now that most of the decks aren't even really looking to get in additional cards out of aspect. If we have this crazy Spectre choices where there's a lot of great Spectre units, I could see Hera rising, but right now we just don't have the card amount to even consider Hera realistically. Next up, we got another list that had another deck added to the last time I did this, and that's Hondo. So Hondo Blue is on the list now. Again, I played a lot of Hondo Yellow, and I've been really unimpressed with Hondo Yellow. I'm actually going to immediately just start off this by dropping Hondo Yellow in the D tier, especially in comparison of the other Hondo list that has come out, as well as just kind of what we've gotten in the meta as of late. Hondo Yellow is not really a big reason to be playing him, especially when you can compare to like Boba Green, for example, which is a very similar deck, but instead of, going ahead and having a good leader with a nice curve, you're trading that off for a pretty weak leader comparatively, and also like some specific ways to take advantage of Hondo's smuggle mechanics. But remember, you're playing kind of weaker cards normally than you otherwise would have been playing in order to take advantage of a leader that doesn't even give you all that much. And so that combination, I think, puts him into D tier. However, Hondo Blue is a little bit of a different case. I actually have been pretty impressed with this deck, and I think it's one of the stronger kind of soft control variants. I'm actually going to put him at the top of B tier. I don't think it's like an amazing deck, okay? I think when people look at soft control or hard control lists, they're like, oh yeah, this is a great deck. It's amazing. It's a better soft control / hard control list, but I think there's only really one of that type of archetype that I would consider for A tier or above A tier, like high A tier or above A tier. And we'll get to that in just a moment. Hondo Blue is not that case, but you have some really nice synergies with Hondo. There's some really nice ways to kind of leverage the fact that you have a million cards because you can play things from your smuggle pile and play things on curve while also controlling your opponent's board and just giving you a lot of tools for every point in the game. I think that's one thing that advantages Hondo. Overall, B tier leader, not exactly that powerful. Next one up, we got to talk about a real stinker, and that's going to be Hunter. Hunter, immediate D tier. I know, unfortunate, but Hunter just doesn't do anything. And just reading his action can kind of give you an idea on why you don't want to play this. It's a 1 resource action that you must go ahead and reveal a resource you control. If it has the same name as a unique unit that you control in play, you may then swap that card, put that card into your hand, and swap with the top of the deck. It's basically 1 resource, draw a card if that card in your resource pile is the same as a unique card on the battlefield. What? Like, what? And that's a friendly unique unit, by the way, not just any unique unit. What? So it's a 1 resource, draw a card, but it's a card that you already resourced, so maybe you didn't even want it. And it had to have matched a card that you played already and has to be a unit. It's just what? Not to mention you're 7 to flip for a 5/8, which is a reasonable stat line, but you don't get anything else. It just doesn't do anything. I've tried to make it more, but it's like 1 resource to draw a card isn't even good enough. Like if this leader said pay 1, draw a card, I would be like, maybe we can do something with this. Like that might be interesting, but it's not even that. Like even Cassian, his draw card is so much easier. Like dealing a couple points of damage to a pace. That's like what you want to be doing. This just doesn't make much sense and is an immediate D tier to me. And yes, Hunter Red is the one I've seen the most, but you don't want to be playing Hunter ever. Next up is Iden, and one of the most popular decks from set 1, but it's really fallen off since set 2. One of the big things about her is that pretty much guaranteed heal, since you're going to be able to kill something every turn, kind of negated that Sabine action, which is a very common dynamic from set 1. But with set 2, that heal is just not enough, and that flip with the 4/4 body with shielded just isn't really doing a whole lot. Usually you have to be a lot more proactive. Again, soft control / hard control variants do exist in set 2, and there are a few better ones. And that's mainly because they have some sort of explosive turn or have some other way to leverage their power in the game. If you look at like Bossk Blue, for example, they can have these crazy flip turns or just get constant value by picking off your opponent's units. Hondo just has a second hand the entirety of the game. Iden doesn't really get any of those. It's just like a solid extra value leader. For that, I'm going to be putting her a little bit above the Gar Saxon yellow in the B tier. Double Blue Iden can do some work. 4 cost vigilance is one of the great reasons to be in double vigilance, and I talked about this with Gar Saxon, but you just don't really get that much with Iden herself. Same thing goes with Iden Green, but I'd actually argue that Iden Green is actually a C tier list these days, especially when compared to the other vigilance command lists that we have that we're going to be talking about that are just a lot better than her. Again, these lists that are trying to kind of curve out a little bit while also playing a little bit more of a controlling game, you just can't really get that much value from Iden, and unfortunately she just kind of falls short overall. Next up, we've got IG. Oh man, I've tried to play IG, guys. I've tried to play IG blue, IG yellow, IG double red, IG green. It's just something that I like playing, and it's not that good. Just not that good. There are just so many reasons to play a different leader. If you wanted to play red-green with a very quick-to-deploy leader that's pretty aggressive, Kylo Ren. You have the Kylo Ren Reanimator strategy, which I don't even think is that great, but we will talk about it later on in the tier list video here. IG green, I actually would vote for it to be just straight up D tier. There are just so many better options if you're trying to go this strategy. If you're trying to play command specifically, you have like Super Laser Technician and things that you want to be playing because they're high value units, but they just work so much better in other lists. IG has a really hard time, especially nowadays, to flood the board in order to get advantage from his action. And even if you are getting 1 to 2 actions from IG, you flooded the board with pretty mediocre units. You could do this a little bit easier with IG yellow with like Greedo and Death Star Stormtrooper, for example. But even then, just like this hyper aggressive strategy usually falls flat to even other hyper aggressive strategies that are just a little bit better tuned, like Sabine Wren, for example, can really dwarf a lot of your strategies by just going something like turn 1 Battlefield Marine, turn 2 Wing Leader. Suddenly you're trading with your Kylo's TIE Silencer, and they've dwarfed your ground assault. There's just so many different things that make IG a lot weaker than the other variants you have. If you wanted to consider the aggression villainy side of things, you have like Grand Inquisitor, you've got Kylo Ren, you've got even Darth Vader, all of which are very, very different strategies, but all of which can kind of do what IG is trying to do even better than IG can do it usually. Next up, we're going to talk about Grand Inquisitor. This is a deck that I've actually very surprised that I have not seen more and more people play it. IG blue and Grand Inquisitor blue and Grand Inquisitor yellow. I think Grand Inquisitor yellow, this like combo centric version where you're trying to leverage sneak attack and like these really, really convoluted combos, really suffers from the Star Wars Unlimited action economy, where you're forced to allow your opponent to respond to every single little thing you do so they can see your combo coming from a mile away. This is a lot more of an all-in strategy and suffers because of it. I would actually put this pretty deep into C tier. I really do not think Grand Inquisitor Yellow is nearly as strong as some other variants. Even if you wanted to talk about like Grand Inquisitor Red, for example, which is another more popular variant that could have even made the list instead of Grand Inquisitor Yellow. Yes, there's some fun things you can do, and you don't have to go all in, but if you're not going all in, then why would you just not play more valuable units in Grand Inquisitor Blue, which just kind of does the same thing? If you're trying to play this like value game where you're getting in some damage, you're playing these units that you can get readied up, Grand Inquisitor Blue is exactly the deck you want to be doing that with. You have things like Sonara Sand, you have things like Deathwatch Loyalist, you have things like Clan Challengers that can get a lot of value, and Vigilance is the perfect backup combination because you can also help you control the board potentially, get you some advantages in terms of upgrades, etc. I actually think this deck's pretty good. And I would put it around the same tier as Gar Saxon Yellow. They're a very similar style of deck. They're trying to like get some earlier units down, leverage the fact that they get stronger, can pump additional damage, and then close out the game. And that's the thing that they both struggle with, is closing out the game. Now, the fortunate thing about Grand Inquisitor is that you're playing aggression. So you have things like Chaos of War if you want to play it. You have things like Daring Raid if you want to play it. Whereas Gar Saxon usually does not. But Grand Inquisitor, still pretty good. I'm a little bit surprised, again, as I said earlier, that I haven't seen more Grand Inquisitor being played. Next up, we got Jabba the Hutt. This is a deck that I have had a lot of fun with, and one of the first decks that I really kind of delved into because I loved the 2-card combo between Dryden, Voss, and Jabba, and I think it's responsible for one of the most powerful combos in the entirety of the game. This idea of being able to steal a unit from your opponent is really strong, and even more so than that, you get kind of this free steal alongside a body, and you get to re-trigger their when played effects with Dryden plus Jabba. However, it isn't like incredibly competitive. Jabba Red and Jabba Yellow, the two decks that I've seen, I would put Jabba Red around the same tier as I would put like Boba Red, or actually I would even put Boba Red better than Jabba Red here. It's just, there's too much setup that's required, like putting a bounty on something, trying to attack with Django. People see it a mile away. Again, it suffers from the same thing that Grand Inquisitor Yellow actually suffers from, which is the action economy. People just see it coming. It's one of the reasons why I like Jabba Yellow a little bit better, is because you have a little bit of more tempo control over the game. And I would actually wager that this is more of a high B tier list that people are just not appreciating. You have a lot of tempo plays, as I said, immediate value with things like Cloud Rider, Forlom, in some cases Zuckuss. You have things like Hunter the Haxian Brood. A 4/3 shielded is nothing to kind of scoff at. That's a pretty strong turn to play. You also have things like Dryden to give you an incredible late game, which is really, really nice. All of that said, there are a lot of better ramp strategies that are trying to go big, and Jabba just really struggles against that because it's usually not as valuable as those really late game strategies. And also, it could still get overrun by things like Sabine. So while not a top tier deck, I do think, again, similar to Grand Inquisitor Blue, I know I've compared to Grand Inquisitor a lot, at least these two, it is a deck that I'm surprised I'm not seeing a lot more people play it. Maybe that's just because Jabba is not really that exciting of a leader to play. Now, you want to talk about a truly useless leader, we got to talk about Jin. Now, I've actually saw a pretty popular list, Jin Yellow, on SWUDB, but unfortunately, I just the units in double yellow usually aren't as good as yellow green or cunning aggression. The thing about double yellow is that you get cunning, you get access to these really nice tempo plays. But the thing is, if you don't have the deck to kind of formulate around that, those cards also get a lot worse. And that's exactly the case with double yellow Jin. I've even played the double yellow Jin deck quite a bit. I've been not impressed with it. I guess I could have added it to the list, but I'm actually going to put Jin just straight up in the D tier. I actually just think it's one of the worst decks to be playing. It's just a deck that doesn't really do anything. There's almost never a situation where I'm like, ooh, I get to action my Jin right now. And even if I flip Jin, I have to be attacking into their units, and it's not even like a great body. It's trying to do this like value trading thing, which doesn't really happen in Premiere all that often. And while all that's being done, you're also trying to play a little bit more aggressive, which doesn't fit well with the action to attack a unit. So like if you're playing heroism, you're playing cunning. If you're just playing cunning, it's usually lending itself to a more aggressive tempo-oriented deck. And in this case, if you're playing heroism, cunning, it even more so reinforces that fact, because at least heroism right now doesn't really have the same control options as villainy does. So just not a great deck, not something that I would be playing, and definitely a leader that really doesn't fit well in the overall scheme of things in Premiere. Next up, we got another soft control list similar to Iden Green, or even something like Hondo Blue, and that is Director Krennic. Now, this one might come to a shock to some people, but I'm actually going to drop him in the A tier. We saw him finish at a couple top 8 spots. I think this is one of those underrated soft control lists. This is another deck that I would definitely put on the radar for people who are looking for kind of more curve out controlling, like a little bit more mid-rangey list where you have tools to remove your opponent's units while also curving out. This just gets a lot of value from a lot of the random units inside the game and a lot of just random damage coming around, because there is a lot of random damage just floating around in the game, like Bossk, Cad Banes. This random stuff just pumps up your units naturally. And in general, you can kind of go with the same soft control list that you might be seeing in like Iden or in another deck that we're going to be talking about in a little bit, but getting just natural value. The other thing to consider is that he's a 2/7 when he flips, which is really kind of hard to kill, and gives you that restore 2, which can help you reach those Darth Vader turns and those Maul turns, which can be really explosive. So this is a list that has taken a couple top 8 spots, is that soft control variant, and I definitely think it's slightly better than Hondo in that A tier category that a lot of people aren't considering on their radar for right now in set 2. All right, let's talk about Kylo Ren, probably the most explosive yet most swingy leader in all of set 2. I've said this quite a few times. It's also one of my favorite leaders to play just because I think it's so fun to like knock people out on turn 3. I have since kind of dropped him a little bit just because of kind of how the meta is shaped up. It's really, really poor against Boba Yellow. It's really, really poor against Bossk Blue. It's really, really poor against Cad Bane and all these other lists that are kind of more and more meta. Kylo Ren, I still believe to be the strongest of the 3. I'm going to kind of put it in that same tier as Bo-Katan Blue. Definitely at the lower end of B tier. Now, there is a little bit of talk around Kylo Green. I have not been impressed with Kylo Green. Yes, you have the Reanimator synergies, but if you're going to be doing that, there's just so many other leaders that you can be going with, because you don't need to be actively discarding your own cards in your hand to try to do this like early value play, but then to return the value in later stages of the game with Palpatine's return. You could be just playing a natural red-green deck that has like Palpatine has Palpatine's return, and just being able to get him kind of just straight up in a game by it trading off, it getting discarded by pillages and whatnot. This just to me is not a viable strategy realistically. If you're wanting to play these big things, reanimating just isn't really working right now inside the game because it's too expensive. It's only a 1 resource discount essentially. Then we also have Kylo Yellow, and I would put Kylo Yellow. I mean, I actually just would put Kylo Green like further down the list, like deeper into C tier, and I put Kylo Yellow also into C tier, slightly better than Kylo Green, whereas Kylo Red's just a little bit better than that. They're all kind of the same deck, which is they're trying to get down early units, get an early Kylo Ren flip, and then finish out the game in some way. Red does it in the burn style, so Chaos of War and Daring Raids. Yellow does it by kind of getting sneak attacks and getting this like immediate damage in. And then Kylo Green is doing it by getting some later game value with Palpatine's returns and things like that. All of which are not as strong as some other cards that you could be playing or other decks that you could be playing for what they're trying to do. If I wanted to talk about a truly awful leader, I would definitely be talking about Lando. This is just a terrible, terrible leader. I'm going to put him at the top of D tier. There are some cool things that you could be doing, and double yellow Lando is the one that I focused on the most. I've seen people playing like red yellow Lando, but I said this earlier with like yellow versions of decks like double yellow Jin. If you're playing bad units, then pumping them up with like tempo plates doesn't really do a whole lot. Now the exception to that is Lando's all tempo. Like Jin is trying to make these value trades while also tempoing out if you're playing double yellow, but Lando is, I'm literally just defeating my resources all game, not even going to go above like 4 resources. And you can play that strategy, but the smuggle cards are just not strong enough to really leverage Lando's ability. His early flip doesn't really do much because it only attacks for 2, whereas Sabine attacks for 3, which is way better, especially since it's going to guarantee you, well, most of the time guarantee you at least 1 additional damage, in some cases 2, in most cases 2. This just doesn't do anything, basically. I have been really unimpressed with Lando, and I was really hoping to get some value out of his smuggle kind of mechanic, but unfortunately, there's not good enough cards to smuggle out, and his leader isn't good enough to flip and get in early damage, and he just doesn't compare against all the other double yellow decks, or even like if you're playing aggression, doesn't even compare to like the cunning aggression decks that we have in heroism. Next one is a deck that I have been playing since day 1 of Star Wars Unlimited, and a deck that I also played in a recent video, Leia Red. Now, this is a deck that really didn't get too much from set 2. Got a few things, like I think Timeline Invention's pretty good in the list. Cassian's obviously an amazing addition, but for the most part, we didn't get too many rebels, and that really hindered Leia's overall potential. However, the deck was so well situated and didn't really like lose anything with set 2. Still is a solid rebel aggro list, still has some action cheating, still can pump in a ton of damage, and does get a little bit better. I do think it's a solid like B tier list, and a list that can still pull out some wins for sure. Next up, we got Luke. Luke is definitely one of those lists that is hung in there for the majority of all of Star Wars Unlimited. It's just an overall solid leader. Getting shield tokens to things being passed around can be really powerful. There are 2 lists that I have here, Luke Red and Luke Green. Luke Red's kind of similar to the Ray Red / Chirrut Red lists. To me, this is just a little bit better than Chirrut Red. It's kind of on the weaker side of things, mainly because you can compare it to Ray Red, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But it just doesn't do too much in terms of building up the superior board state that Ray does, and still struggles in some of the kind of middle stages of the game, leveraging the kind of discard that you're playing while also building out your board state, especially since your action doesn't really do a whole lot for you, since the shield token must be played on the same turn that you're playing that unit, and that can be just a really big disadvantage. However, Luke Green, I think, is a decent chunk better, and I would actually put this at maybe the higher end of B tier. I think this is a list that a lot of people are kind of sleeping on a little bit. Maybe not sleeping because it's a B tier list. I wouldn't even consider that a sleeper, but a list that really does actually perform quite well, has some really nice mid-range strategies, and can do a decent amount of work. We haven't seen, at least as far as I remember, a Luke Green pop into a top 8 of a tournament quite yet. And that is saying something, because it was one of the most popular leaders from set 1 and people continued to play it. However, still the same shell of viewing reinforcements, playing the kind of rampy / high value units, especially Alliance Dispatcher in this deck can be really strong. Overall, solid, but not insane. Next up, we got Mandalorian Blue, and my oh my, this deck has just fallen a little bit in terms of what I think of it. There's just too many things that you need to be doing in order to make Mandalorian work. His flip being a 6 cost 4/7, giving you kind of that nice little tap down or exhaust feature when you play an upgrade can be okay. But his front side and his exhausting really just completely relies on your opponent having units. Otherwise, it doesn't do anything. And even more so than that, unlike like Bossk, for example, that requires your opponents to have units, you also need to have units of your own, and you also need to have units of your own that you're going to be playing upgrades on. I suppose you can be playing bounties in your opponent's units and then exhaust them that way, but that still requires another piece that Bossk doesn't really require, which is some sort of thing to make your deck function, you need multiple pieces. Like just playing units, you could do that in any deck. And when you try to put upgrades into your deck and also keep your units alive while also leveraging the upgrades while also doing all this stuff, it can be really tricky. Not to mention the meta has evolved to where people are playing like full play sets or 2 to 3 of disabling Fang Fighters. People are playing main deck confiscates. Like the upgrades are just not that good. Even if you are able to get them down, this to me has become a C tier deck list. Even though I was really happy with it, just not that strong. Next up, we got Boba Red, and this is new Boba Red. So new Boba Red really revolves around the same things that Sabine Red or Sabine Green and Leia Red are trying to do, playing the standard green red heroism aggro shell. But instead of kind of doing the full rebel, I guess I shouldn't say the green red rebel aggro, it's kind of going green red keyword aggro, which is a lot of rebels still, but you're going to have a lot of these cards that maybe you're not playing in green red Sabine or green red Leia. However, that can be pretty strong, especially flipping Boba and having a 4/7 in the middle stage of the game can help you finish out a game. It's just a solid deck list. I think it's on kind of a similar level as Leia, where you do have this really nice aggro curve out, but against some decks, you just don't have the firepower in terms of early plays or the ability to leverage multiple attacks in a single turn like Leia does, or have an earlier flip. That Boba Fett's just a little bit worse than Leia Red, which is a little bit shocking. I've gone down on this guy. I used to put him a little bit higher, but the more I've played of the other options that we have, the more I just view Boba as kind of this one trick where you want to be playing these things on curve, or you want to be playing like one unit at a turn, but you can't leverage it, or you can't even play multiple units in a turn usually and get advantage out of that because usually the cheap units don't have keywords, so you can't even get value out of that necessarily. Like you can fold the board, but it's not really what Boba's trying to do, and there are better options for that, especially since Boba Fett flips on 6. As I said, lots of different situations for Boba Fett that really don't add up for set 2. Now, you might look at this list and say, oh, wow, we're really stacked on these D, C, and B tiers, right? But this is where we start to head into some of the heavy hitters of set 2. For the most part, the rest of this list are going to be decks that are at least B tier or above. So just get ready. And we're going to start off with an absolute banger in the new Han Solo. And I am going to actually I am not going to put I'm actually going to put new Han Blue above Boba Yellow. So Boba Yellow is still one of the most played decks out there. New Han Blue is an extremely expensive deck and is marginally better than Boba Yellow in terms of overall its matches or matchups. However, the thing about Boba Yellow is that it hardcore wins some of them and has a pretty good matchup into some, and then just really kind of struggles as its only matchup against some of the more hard control lists because you don't have the ability to bounce things and leverage the additional resources that you're gaining. Whereas Han Blue can kind of just play value, and then have crate dragons for that and just compete against the earlier plays. It just overall has a better matchup. Now, if I were to just personally rate or rate purely from statistics, I would be putting new Han Blue probably just behind Boba Yellow because it still had an amazing win rate. It's still taken down a tournament. It's still put in a bunch of top 8s. It's been absolutely amazing. However, and this is a big however, it's kind of on the newer front of things. And so a lot of people have had Boba Yellow for so long that just continue to use him. So I would wager to say that there is a possibility that new Han Blue could actually overtake Boba Yellow in terms of its performance. And regardless of whether or not it's going to be better than Boba Yellow, there is an argument between these two, but I still think it's just like top 3 deck in the entire meta right now. So that's not really that arguable. But then we also have multiple other options, including Han Green, new Han Green, which I will also drop into the S tier here, which might be a little bit surprising to you all. But again, this is one of those lists that really is a little bit of a sleeper list. We've seen Han Green pop into a top 8, I believe, once. And it's mostly people are just playing Han Blue. And it's mostly people are playing other versions of new Han over new Han Green. But I just think that the leader ability from new Han is by far the best that we've seen from set 2, and it's been pretty exceptional. I think you could argue that this is on the same tier as like a Boba Green, so you can put it like the top of A tier. But at least in terms of the performance from new Han Green, maybe that is a little bit more fair to put it just behind Boba Green in terms of what it's actually done in terms of statistics, not just what what the popular kind of experience has been. But also we have New Han Red, and New Han Red I'm also going to put in the A tier, a little bit behind New Han Green. This is also a list that has appeared every once in a while, similar to New Han Green, and has done pretty well as this aggro shell. Double Red New Han is extremely powerful, and this, again, similar to how Boba Fett just puts its decks in the top positions of this tier list, this is a reflection of New Han's leader capabilities. Whenever you have multiple lists with multiple aspects and they all perform quite well, it's a really, really hard argument to make that it's just the fact that they're playing the cards, right? Because otherwise every deck would be higher up on the list. This is a situation where New Han is by far the best leader from set 2, and I don't think anyone will really argue that, and it has just continuously improved all the different archetypes that it could play, and it just does well. It just does well. So very impressive from all these different archetypes. These are a little bit more established because we've seen a lot of them over the course of time, and they've performed pretty well. You could argue, again, that they should be a little bit lower on the list, but New Han is just extremely, extremely strong, that I've been very impressed with all the different archetypes that it has. Next up, we got to talk about Palpatine, however, and Palpatine Green, Palpatine Yellow. So Palpatine Yellow has been popping up in the occasional top 8. I think it's made 2 top 8 so far. It's the one I'm going to talk about first. This definitely ends up in the A tier as a pretty powerful list, and I think it has nothing to really do with the aspect, and yet again have to do with the just leader portion of this. Flipping Emperor Palpatine and stealing a unit is just extremely oppressive. It is just extremely oppressive, and the way the game has evolved a little bit is, while we do have extremely powerful aggro decks that have arguably gotten extremely more scary, they're not full on extremely 2, 3, 4 resource play aggro decks. If you look at Boba Yellow, it's trying to finish the game with like Fett's Fire Spray and around the Boba Fett flip turn. If you look at Sabine Green, as trying to finish the game with a Wrecker, which is turn 5. If you look at things like Han Yellow, you're flipping a 7 resource play on turn 4, let's say, and you're finishing the game by like turn 5. There's a lot more turns in the game, whereas Sabine used to be like turn 2, turn 3, turn 4s. You're really struggling, and then you get burnt out, and you didn't even have any way to recover. And now we have things like, in yellow, at least Cloud Rider. We have like the triple official plus Emperor's Royal Guard plus Phase 3 Dark Trooper in green and Palpatine, which allows you to really stall out the game and give you some advantage. But I really don't see a whole lot of advantage to be playing Palpatine Yellow over double green Palpatine. And I'm actually going to put double green Palpatine in the S tier. The more I play against this deck, the more I feel like it just has a really good matchup against some of the decks here in the S tier, particularly New Han Blue. Double green Palpatine really has a really nice matchup against New Han Blue, mainly because it's able to outvalue and get to those big plays even faster, and then you can kind of dwarf your opponent's plays, which is kind of what New Han Blue is trying to do, right? Ramp every turn and play the big stuff. Well, guess what? Double green Palpatine does it, and Command is an absurd card. The double aspect cards, with the exception of maybe Aggression, they're all extremely powerful and really define why people are playing some of these S tier decks. Like, if you look at double yellow Palpatine, what's the best card in the deck? I would argue that it's Cunning. Same with double yellow Han, that, or maybe like the DJ Tech. If you look at Palpatine, what's the best card in the deck? Probably Command, as it's just so versatile. It gives you like additional way to give board presence while also ramping you, and that board presence is not negligible. It really can take over a game, especially if you have a Sentinel that gives it 2 experience tokens, or if they have a space here, you get to kill it and ramp. Like, these are just some absurd things you can be doing, all for the low cost of 4 resources. And once you get to Palpatine, you flip him, and boom, suddenly you're like way ahead in the game, and that's exactly what happens every single time. And here we get to the soft control list that I've been subtly referring to and not so subtly referring to in Qi'Ra Green. Now, here's what's interesting about this. I have personally played a lot of Qi'Ra Green with ECL in set 2, and the list that was kind of getting more and more popular was a Qi'Ra Green without ECL. And to be honest, after playing the one without ECL, I don't think you're really missing all that much when you're playing with ECL. And that's one thing that I think a lot of people are maybe mistaking in a lot of these recent tournaments, because we've seen Qi'Ra Green perform really well, multiple top 8s, a couple of top finishes, and I think winning even a tournament at Gen Con. It was Wu that won it, I believe. And this deck just absolutely just some massive value trades throughout the game, has some really nice plays, and still has like the Vader, the Mauls if you want to run Mauls, but mostly the Vaders that tend to come down. You're still playing things like Snoke and just these really powerful units, but also just completely dominating the board with those shield tokens early on and being able to reset the board in a lot of cases with the Qi'Ra flip. And you don't really have a great ECL target in your deck. And so playing ECL can sometimes be a detriment by losing that 5 HP, because that can really help you get to things like Avenger, things like Snoke, things like Darth Vader, and actually equalize the game. This, to me, is the quintessential soft control list that you're really looking for, and has been really well performing and continues to kind of dominate, at least online. And I think that's mainly because people are not playing the list that actually performed better, and that's the non-ECL version of Qi'Ra Green. Next up, we're going to talk about another set 2 leader in Rey, and this one's a very good set 2 leader, but I wouldn't quite put her in the S tier. I know some people are a little bit disappointed by that. We have Rey Green, Rey Red, and Rey Yellow. Rey Yellow is definitely the newest addition. Rey Red has been kind of the staple for Rey for quite some time, and I'm going to start off with the Rey Red here and put it near the... I think I should swap these around. I'm actually going to swap new Han Green behind old Han Green, because I think that Rey Red is slightly better than Han Green, or Han Green is slightly better than Rey Red, but I don't think a new Han Green is better than Rey Red. The main reason is the discard aspect, while also putting board presence down because of the additional resource that you can spend and dwarfing your opponent's units, works exceptionally well against a lot of the decks above it. Pillaging a Han, double yellow Han, pillaging double yellow Boba, pillaging double green Palpatine can really mess up their strategies. Force throwing, drawing additional cards, just having the tools and removal to deal with everything that you're putting down, especially against like new double yellow Han and double yellow Boba. Having things like Fell the Dragons, Takedowns, Rivals Fall, well, mainly Fell the Dragons and Rivals Fall, can be really, really helpful. And then also attacking their hand can kind of put them in a position where they're out of steam. And then you just use Rey to restore back up to the point where you're not in threat. Rey Green does a little bit of a different job, where it's trying to go ahead and realistically leverage all the restoring aspects. It's really just putting out value units turn after turn after turn, getting some more value with the experience tokens, and then just kind of restoring your way throughout the game and preventing yourself from dying. Rey Yellow is a little bit more of an aggro deck, which is different from the Rey Red and Rey Green, and you're trying to be a little bit more of a tempo player with the things like Cartel Spacer, Chopper, these like really cheap 1 resource plays that become 2 resource plays on turn 1 because of Rey's action. And it can be really, really strong to leverage that additional tempo and actually just race your opponent in a lot of situations. Because of the Restore 3, you can do it very, very easily in a lot of matchups. So Rey Red, the best of the 3. I think Rey Yellow is a little bit better than Rey Green, and I think Rey Green fits in the 3rd slot of those 3. Probably the last and most heavy hitter of the entire list here. Up there with Boba Yellow. Maybe not quite as a heavy hitter as Boba Yellow, but I will say Sabine Green has just stuck in there as one of the most powerful decks of the entire format. And I'm going to put it right behind New Han Blue, because I think New Han Blue actually has a pretty reasonable matchup against Sabine Green. If they're not playing like Darksaber, if they don't get the Darksaber immediate attack in, New Han Blue can do a really, really nice job against Sabine Green. Not to mention they're kind of designing their deck against her. However, you can still get absolutely destroyed by Sabine Green. There's just so many tools that you have with new Sabine. It's particularly more of a mid-range deck than an aggro deck, which is a little bit strange. But against, like, let's say Boba or Han or old Han or new Han or whatever Han or all these different matchups, you have Wrecker to instantly one-shot their leaders, which is not something that you used to have before. You have Poe Dameron to instantly one-shot their leaders, which you didn't have before, by the way, on the same turns that they can deploy. You have more reach because of the Wreckers and Poes. You have time intervention to give you even more late game. You have things like Darksaber to pump in even more damage in the early game. There's just so many different angles that you could attack with Sabine. You can still have the standard Rebel aggro curve. You can still go ahead and do the kill on turn 4 type thing, kill on turn 3 with like a Darksaber Sabine. And yet, even if you aren't able to do that, you still have so much late game potential that it still remains scary throughout the entirety of the game, unlike from set 1, where you were really only worried about 4 cards. You now have to worry about multiple different cards from Sabine Green. Sabine double red, I think, is a decent chunk worse, but still remains in the A tier category. I think it kind of firmly fits into the middle pack of A tier. It is quite strong. Actually, I'm going to take that back. I'm going to actually put it a little bit further down, similar to where New Han red fits, a little bit closer to like the middle, like bottom pack, because I was thinking that this was Sabine yellow for some reason, but I said Sabine red. Sabine yellow is going to fit firmly into the middle pack of A tier. And that goes to show you kind of how powerful, once again, a leader like Sabine is. The ability to just guarantee a single point of damage every single turn is extremely oppressive, because it kind of puts your opponent at like 5 HP on their base from the start of the game because of the 1 damage that you can get off Sabine. Not quite that way, but that's kind of how it feels. And because you are, generally speaking, the more aggressive player, like I think Sabine Green, even though it's not like an aggro deck, it is still the most aggro deck that we have, which is a little bit interesting. You really don't care about the damage to your own base. Sabine yellow, Sabine red kind of follow the same suit. Sabine red, a little bit more direct damage in like the Chaos of War, Daring Raid, things like that, but you don't get too much, especially since double red Sabine gets aggression, which is the weakest. If you could play like double yellow Sabine, like if you could play Cunning, or if you could play not Vigilance, but like Cunning or maybe Command, this could be insane. I don't know. Command's a little bit weak. I think Cunning is really what it wants. Then I could see a different kind of position for these. Sabine yellow, it's still quite strong, can still end games very, very quickly, but you don't get access to ECL as well, and you don't get access to even Tarkin Town. So Tarkin Town's a decent step down. It's one of the reasons why it's still an A tier, though, because the base is pretty powerful. But in Sabine Yellow, you get a 30 HP base, generally speaking, and that is just significantly weaker. Honestly, the curve with Sabine Yellow is still very solid, and you get some very good units. And if you had that ability to immediately ambush something, it could be a little bit higher. But you also are missing out on part of the reasons why ECL is so good, and that's Wrecker and Poe Dameron. With Sabine Yellow, because you're not running ECL, which is kind of interesting. So ECL is only amazing because of Wrecker and Poe are generally only amazing because of Energy Conversion Lab, and then Energy Conversion Lab just makes them absolutely absurd and powers up the deck an absurd amount. But overall, Sabine, all A tier / S tier decks. Next up, we're going to talk about Tarkin Yellow, which has been a pretty impressive deck and still one of the decks that I have kind of on my radar. I would put it solidly alongside Sabine Yellow. I would put it a little bit behind Sabine Yellow just because it does have an edge, or Sabine Yellow does have an edge against Tarkin Yellow. This is a super strong deck. It kind of does the same thing that Rey is trying to do, giving you an early board presence like with Rey Yellow. But instead of having a 6 deploy leader, you have a 5 deploy leader, and it can actually give you more damage. Not to mention the Imperial cards are quite strong. Things like TIE Advanced and Triple Dark Raid alongside a lot of your Imperial cards can really give you a ton of advantage. If Rey Yellow could be playing Triple Dark Raid, there might be a different version of the deck that could be extremely powerful, but unfortunately that's just a villainy card, and it is a very strong villainy card if you're trying to play an aggressive deck, and Tarkin is just that. So this does do a lot of damage. You have a lot of Imperial synergies. You can pump a lot of damage, and it's one of the best decks at making Lurking TIE Phantom an absolute menace. You can't kill it with removal. You can't go ahead and kill it with make an opening because Tarkin's pumped it up. The only way you got to kill it is something like a Sentinel or hitting it with combat damage usually. But Tarkin usually puts it out of range there. So if you're able to set up a situation where you can pump up a Lurking TIE Phantom, it can just completely end games. There are ways outside of that I should mention, like Traitorous and Waylay that can answer it temporarily, but that's a really nice tempo advantage usually and can really wreck your opponent just by getting in a couple of attacks with it. So Tarkin, pretty nice, and I generally like a little bit more than Rey Yellow, but very similar to Sabine Yellow. We got 2 more leaders to talk about. The second to last one is going to be Thrawn. Thrawn Blue, a little bit more of a controlling list. I'm sorry, guys. I love my Thrawn. I've been trying to make Thrawn work for a very, very long time. Here's the thing with Thrawn. The ability to exhaust stuff and kind of stall out the game is just not that strong. It really doesn't give you all that much of an advantage. You have to leverage Super Laser Blast or some sort of powerful event to bring you to parity. One of the things that other soft control and hard control decks are doing is either playing units to keep pace or to outvalue your opponents so you can maintain board presence, or just completely remove everything every turn and maybe get a little bit more value when you're getting later parts in the curve. Exhausting units just usually waste resources. You can prevent damage, but you didn't really deal with a threat unless you have a super laser blast. And even if you do, that may not even be good enough because your opponent can potentially rebuild extremely well. To me, this is not a very powerful control list. I would much prefer, if I was going to play Villainy, Cunning, Vigilance, I would much prefer Boba. And I think it's just kind of on the same tier as like Gar Saxon and Iden and this type of deck. It does have some nice tools, and it did get a lot better with set 2, I will say, but it's still not a deck that I'm pretty excited about playing, and it's still going to be a C tier list. And here we come to the final deck, final leader of the entire video, one of my favorites, and also one of the leaders that I actually have an event exclusive promo for, and that is going to be Darth Vader. Now I got Darth Vader green and Darth Vader blue on the list here. Last time I didn't have Darth Vader blue, and a lot of people were like, oh man, why do you have Darth Vader blue on here? Isn't it one of your favorites in set 1? It was, and it was the deck that I played the most outside of Leia red, but I don't actually think it's nearly as strong as some of the other soft control and hard control options that we have. I would actually start off with Vader, placing him just behind Iden. I actually prefer the double blue Iden over the red blue Darth Vader, because usually double blue Iden's actually also playing Crate Dragons as its finisher, still playing Avenger and stuff like that. But unfortunately with Darth Vader is you actually just don't have enough time to get to that later part of the game because Vigilance costs too much. You don't have the extra heal coming down every single turn. Yes, you have a nice way to control the board when you do get to it. And yes, you do have tools to potentially get to it. But a lot of the time, your opponent's going to be able to just completely rush you in the early game with like Sabine or with double yellow Han, or just prevent you from flipping into Vader with that, or just ramp past you and get more value with double green Palpatine, or just flood the board with like green Han, new Han, or like old Han. There's like so many different decks that you have to consider. Not to mention you have like the direct counters with like Lurking TIE Phantom with Boba yellow and Tarkin yellow. It's just so many different things you have to deal with. I've been really unimpressed with it. And granted, some of these problems also apply to other control decks, but even more so when you don't have a flipped leader to kind of support you through these troubling times to get to the later stage. Vader green, on the other hand, I'm actually a lot more fond of, and I think this is one of those decks where is kind of sleeping, or people are sleeping on it. I think it's very similar to New Han green, where Vader just has kind of potentially better counterparts in some scenarios where you're trying to ramp. But in Vader's case, you have a really powerful leader to back you up, and that can be really, really powerful. Vader green's really strong. You have some amazing things to ramp into, similar to Bossk green, but instead of just having the 5 resource flip and trying to play up around bounties, you can just play high value plays every single point of the curve. And when you get to 7 resources with Darth Vader, and you can play Darth Vader unit and Darth Vader leader on the same turn, it just absolutely switches the game into your favor, and it's basically not able to be come back from unless someone has like a super laser blast to reset the board. Very, very strong deck. Nice little mid-range shell and mid-range ramp shell, I should say. And that's going to wrap up our tier list. So let's go ahead and talk about final thoughts on this list. And of course, mention a few things. All right. So first things first, I know there's going to be lists missing that people really wanted to see here. Maybe like double red Grand Inquisitor, or I don't know, like Leia yellow or something that I missed. This really does encompass most of what I have seen, well, from the top 8s and tournaments in general, but also from my time on Qi'Ra. Now, for those of you that don't necessarily spend a ton of time watching all my videos or anything like that, I will say I am one of the few creators / people that spend hours on Qi'Ra and record them all for you, because I actually post them in my videos. So I get a very good idea of what the popular / community opinion of these decks are. And yes, I know Qi'Ra is a very small portion of the community, but that's not considering a lot of the casual players, because casual players are just going to play whatever they want. This is the kind of community that's actually interpreting the meta and playing what they would like to play out of the decks that they have chosen, and it's completely free to play on there, so you can really get an idea on what people are enjoying playing, what are the tough matchups, what are things that people are absolutely dominating with, etc. While that is a good resource, there's also just actual competitive results. And you'll notice that I couldn't really put anything in the SS tier that didn't really have competitive, amazing results through the out set 2. Boba Yellow, I put in this first slot, and while I think that Han Blue might be a little bit better in terms of a deck right now, I cannot deny that Boba Yellow has just consistently performed the absolute best, bar none, in set 2, not just in top 8 finishes, but also win percentage within those tournaments. New Han Blue absolutely dominating the scene in terms of also win percentages, but also top 8s, and also has a really good matchup into Sabine right now, which is kind of nice. Sabine Green has been here from since set 1. Set 2 still continues to dominate. You could definitely swap New Han Blue and Sabine Green. I think that would be completely fair. And in fact, now that I mentioned kind of the logic behind Boba Yellow, I think that I should be swapping those two. New or old Han Yellow, this is kind of a little bit of a sleeper. I think a lot of people don't really play it all that much, but if Control is coming back in the meta, this is a list that I've been really fond of to mess with the opponent's hand, mess with their resources, etc. Qi'Ra Green, super solid soft control list. I think the best of its archetype, but I think a lot of people are kind of potentially not actually understanding of what Qi'Ra is really good at. It's a really tough deck to actually pilot, especially since her leader flip is so unique, and getting value out of that can be really tricky. And then Palpatine Green, another list that has just been getting so much top 8, so much value, and really performs well against these big unit play decks where you're playing like maybe an Avenger, or you're playing some sort of Crate Dragon, or whatever it is that you're playing, and Palpatine can just steal it. That can really help its numbers. But also just Command is an extremely powerful card. The early Sentinels help you against early aggro decks. And there's a lot of ways to heal, surprisingly, in double green Palpatine. But overall, I think that there's not really anything too surprising in S tier, I wouldn't say. Like, I think you could argue, like, oh, I think Boba Green should be an S tier, or I think I think Bossk Blue should be an S tier. And I wouldn't blame you. I think some of those lists that we need a little bit more time to really see how they're going to perform and shape up in the meta. And because the meta is constantly developing. But again, that's for the comment section. That's for future videos. And that's for me to adapt in my future videos. Overall, I think this is a pretty solid list. And I would be surprised if anyone's got some major issues with any specific deck. But if you do, let me know in the comment section down below, because that's what this video is for. That's what tier lists are for. It's for sharing opinions, sharing kind of what's happened in the game, and getting a community discussion started around it. So let me know what you think in the comment section down below. I apologize, all of you Fennec lovers, which I know there's a few of you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all for the next one.